I had it all figured out, a successful software engineer with my own home at 32. Then I met Jessica at a charity event, beautiful, smart, and came from a wealthy family that owned a thriving business. 1 year later, I proposed and she said yes. I thought we were perfect together until we started discussing the prenup. I noticed how she kept emphasizing her financial status, but I brushed it off. I never imagined she would look me straight in the eye and say those words that changed everything. Before I share this incredible story with you, let me know where you are watching from and hit that subscribe button. If you have ever felt undervalued in a relationship, this story might just give you the courage to stand up for yourself. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Portland. My parents were hardworking people who instilled in me the values of perseverance and integrity. My dad was a high school math teacher, and my mom worked as a nurse. They were not wealthy by any means, but they made sure my younger sister and I never lacked anything essential. From an early age, I developed a passion for computers. I would spend hours tinkering with the family computer, figuring out how things work. By the time I was 14, I was already building basic websites for local businesses. This early start gave me a clear direction for my future. I studied computer science at Oregon State University, working part-time jobs to help pay for my education. After graduation, I landed a position at a growing tech company in Seattle. Over the next 8 years, I worked my way up from junior developer to senior software engineer. I lived modestly, saved diligently, and invested wisely. By 32, I had enough for a down payment on a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood. It was not a mansion by any means, but it was mine, bought with money I had earned through years of hard work. The day I got the keys to my house was one of the proudest moments of my life. I remember calling my parents and hearing the pride in their voices. My career was flourishing. I had just completed a major project that received recognition within the industry. Life was good, but something was missing. I wanted someone to share it with. Dating had taken a backseat to my career for years, and my relationships had been casual at best. Then came the night that changed everything. A colleague invited me to a charity gala supporting technology education for underprivileged kids. That is where I met Jessica. She was standing by the bar wearing a stunning blue dress that matched her eyes. Her blonde hair was styled in elegant waves that framed her face perfectly. But it was not just her beauty that caught my attention. It was the confident way she carried herself and the intelligence that shone in her eyes. I mustered the courage to approach her, and we ended up talking for hours. Jessica was the marketing director for her family business, a successful chain of luxury furniture stores across the West Coast. She was passionate about her work and had ambitious plans for expanding the brand. I was immediately impressed by her business acumen and drive. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant overlooking the water. Jessica appreciated good food and wine, and I enjoyed learning about her refined tastes. We discovered we both loved hiking, and our second date was a trek through a nearby national park. Jessica showed a surprisingly adventurous side, keeping pace with me, even on challenging trails. As we continued dating, I was struck by how well we complemented each other. My practical, analytical approach balanced her creative, visionary thinking. We shared similar values about family, hard work, and integrity. We both wanted children eventually and agreed on how we would raise them. Conversations flowed effortlessly, whether we were discussing business strategies, politics, or our favorite movies. 6 months into our relationship, Jessica introduced me to her family. The Bennetts owned a sprawling estate outside the city. Her father, Arthur, was an imposing man with a firm handshake and calculating eyes. Her mother, Patricia, was gracious but reserved. Her brother William, who was being groomed to take over as CEO, was polite but distant. I could tell they were sizing me up, but Jessica seemed so happy to bring these two parts of her life together that I was determined to make a good impression. After a year of dating, I felt certain Jessica was the one. I planned a romantic getaway to the California wine country, a place Jessica had mentioned wanting to visit. On our second evening, during a sunset dinner overlooking the vineyards, I got down on one knee and proposed with a diamond ring that had cost 3 months of my salary. Her eyes filled with tears as she said yes. We spent the rest of the trip planning our future together, talking about a lavish wedding, a house in the suburbs, and eventually children. Life seemed perfect. The first hint that something was off came during a dinner at her parents' house about a month after our engagement. We were discussing potential wedding venues when Arthur mentioned something about protecting the family legacy. At the time, I thought he was just being a protective father, but then Jessica started referring to her assets as solely hers. She would say things like, "I can buy it with my trust fund," or "We can use my vacation house." There was a subtle shift in language that created a separation between her wealth and our partnership. The next day, Jessica brought up the topic of a prenuptial agreement. She was casual about it, saying it was standard for someone in her position. Given the disparity in our financial situations, I understood the practical need. I told her I had no issue with the concept, as long as it was fair to both of us. A week later, I found myself in the office of Thomas Wilson, the Bennett family lawyer. The office was in a high-rise downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Everything about the space screamed wealth and power. Thomas was a man in his 60s with silver hair and designer glasses. From the moment I walked in, I felt like he was looking down on me. Jessica sat beside me as Thomas explained the first draft of the agreement. The initial terms made me uncomfortable. All of Jessica's current assets would remain exclusively hers. Any increase in the value of her business interests would be solely hers. Income generated during our marriage would not be considered community property unless specifically placed in a joint account. If we divorced within the first 5 years, I would not be entitled to any form of spousal support. As Thomas went through each clause, I noticed Jessica nodding along, occasionally squeezing my hand as if to reassure me. But when I looked at her, there was something cold and businesslike in her expression that I had never seen before. On the drive home, I tried to discuss my concerns. The agreement seemed heavily skewed in her favor, offering me little protection. Jessica sighed and said, "Marshall, this is standard for someone with my level of assets. It is just paperwork. It does not change how I feel about you." But something had changed. In the following days, I noticed Jessica became defensive whenever the subject of money arose. When I suggested we set a budget for our honeymoon, she dismissed the idea, saying she would cover it. When I talked about renovating my house to make it ours, she suggested we should just live in her downtown penthouse instead. I began to feel increasingly anxious. The woman I had fallen in love with, who had seemed to value my independence and success, now appeared to view me as financially inferior. I tried to explain that while I did not have family wealth, I had built a successful career and was financially stable. Jessica would smile and say she knew that, but her actions suggested otherwise. One evening, I overheard her on the phone with her father. She was in the home office with the door partially open. I was not trying to eavesdrop, but her raised voice caught my attention. She was saying, "Dad, I will handle Marshall. He will sign the agreement. Trust me." The casual way she talked about handling me sent a chill down my spine. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Perhaps this was just how wealthy families operated, but a nagging feeling of unease continued to grow. I loved Jessica, but I was beginning to question whether she respected me as an equal partner. The second meeting with the lawyers was worse than the first. This time, Jessica had arranged for me to have my own legal representation, a man named Daniel Harris. He was younger than Thomas, perhaps in his early 40s, with a polished appearance and a friendly manner. Initially, I was relieved to have someone advocating for my interests, until I realized that Jessica was paying his fees. His first words to me were, "I understand the Bennetts have been very generous with the terms of this agreement." The new draft of the prenup had even more restrictive clauses. Not only would Jessica's current assets remain solely hers, but any property purchased during our marriage using her funds would be considered her separate property. The house we would live in, which would be purchased with her money, would remain entirely in her name. I would have no claim to it, regardless of how long we were married. If we divorced, I would be required to vacate any property owned by Jessica within 30 days, regardless of whether I had alternative accommodation. There would be no spousal support under any circumstances. Any business I started during our marriage that received any form of investment or support from Jessica or her family would be subject to their partial ownership. As Daniel explained these terms to me privately, he maintained an expression that suggested this was all perfectly reasonable. When I pointed out how one-sided the agreement was, he patted my shoulder and said, "Marshall, you need to understand that the Bennetts are just protecting what they have built over generations. It is not personal." But it felt extremely personal. When we left the office, I confronted Jessica in the parking garage. My voice echoed off the concrete walls as I asked her why she was treating me like a potential gold digger rather than her future husband. Jessica's eyes flashed with anger, something I had rarely seen. "You are being dramatic, Marshall," she snapped. "This is about protecting me and my family. If you really loved me, you would understand that." Her words cut deep, implying that my resistance was proof of ulterior motives. That night, we had our first major argument. In our 8 months of engagement, we had disagreed about things, but never like this. Jessica accused me of not understanding the pressures she faced from her family. I countered that she was allowing her family to dictate the terms of our relationship. The conversation ended with her storming out of my house and driving back to her penthouse. The next day, her brother William called me. This was unusual as we rarely spoke directly. His voice was calm but firm as he explained that the Bennetts had always protected their assets this way. It was nothing against me personally. They just needed to ensure the family business remained secure. The subtext was clear: sign the papers or the marriage would not happen. Over the next few weeks, Jessica became increasingly distant. She would cancel dinner plans last minute due to work emergencies. Our phone conversations became shorter and more formal. When we did spend time together, she would often be on her phone having hushed conversations with her father or the family lawyers. I felt a growing sense of betrayal. The woman I had fallen in love with seemed to be replaced by someone who viewed our relationship as a business transaction with unfavorable terms for me. Still, I tried to salvage things. I suggested couples counseling, but Jessica dismissed the idea as unnecessary. I proposed compromises to the prenup that would still protect her assets while giving me some security, but these were rejected without real consideration. My friends noticed the change in me. During a poker night, my best friend James asked what was wrong. When I explained the situation, he looked concerned. He reminded me that marriage was supposed to be a partnership, not a power imbalance. His words stayed with me, making me question whether I was compromising too much of my self-respect. The final meeting was scheduled at Thomas Wilson's office. The conference room had a long mahogany table with Jessica, her parents, William Thomas, Daniel, and another lawyer I had never met sitting around it. The large windows offered a view of the city skyline, a reminder of the wealth and influence of the Bennett family. I felt outnumbered and overwhelmed. The new lawyer was introduced as Patricia Bennett's personal attorney. His presence suggested this meeting was even more significant than I had anticipated. Thomas slid a thick document across the table to me, the final version of the prenuptial agreement. As I began to read, I realized it was even worse than previous drafts. A new clause had been added about reputational damage. If I ever did or said anything that could harm the Bennett family reputation or business interests, I would be liable for a significant financial penalty. The definition of reputational damage was intentionally vague, giving them enormous latitude to claim I had violated the agreement. Another clause restricted my ability to discuss any aspects of the Bennett family business with anyone even after a divorce. The confidentiality provisions were so broad that I could potentially be penalized for mentioning basic public information about their company. There was even a clause about social media usage requiring me to get approval before posting anything that might indirectly reference the family. As I flipped through the pages feeling increasingly sick to my stomach, Arthur Bennett cleared his throat. "This is a generous agreement, Marshall. We are welcoming you into our family. We just need certain assurances." I looked at Jessica, hoping to see some recognition of how extreme this document was. Instead, she met my gaze with a cool detachment I had never seen before. That was when she said it, the words that would ultimately end our relationship. "You cannot touch my money, Marshall. It is all mine. My family has worked too hard to risk it on someone who might not be around forever." The room fell silent. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting for my reaction. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. This was not about protecting assets. This was about control. About keeping me in a subordinate position in the relationship. About making sure I knew my place. I sat still for a moment, absorbing the full weight of her words. Then, to everyone's surprise, including my own, I smiled. It was not a happy smile, but one of sudden clarity. I realized I had been ignoring red flags for months, making excuses for behavior that should have been deal breakers. I stood up, slowly gathering the pages of the prenup into a neat stack. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady as I addressed the room. I appreciate the time everyone has invested in this process, but I will not be signing this agreement. In fact, I will not be needing any agreement at all." Jessica's face showed confusion, then alarm. "Marshall, what are you saying?" "I am saying that a marriage should be a partnership based on mutual respect and trust. This document and the process that created it has shown me that is not what I would be entering into with you." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the engagement ring, placing it gently on the table in front of Jessica. "I think it is best if we end this now." Arthur Bennett stood up, his face flushed with anger. "Now see here, young man, you cannot just walk away from this. Do you have any idea what you are giving up?" "I do," I replied calmly. "I am giving up a relationship where I would always be considered less than, where my contributions would never be valued equally, where I would be reminded constantly that I married into wealth rather than earning my place. And that is not something I am willing to accept, no matter how much I love your daughter." Jessica was staring at the ring, her composure finally breaking. "You cannot be serious. You are throwing away our future over a piece of paper." "This is not about the paper, Jessica. It is about what it represents, about how you and your family see me, about how you would see me for the rest of our lives together. I do not want that for either of us." With that, I walked out of the conference room. No one followed me. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of the stunned faces around the table. The descent to the lobby felt like a metaphor for the crash of my personal life, but also like the beginning of a necessary escape. Outside, the cool air hit my face, and I took my first deep breath in months. I had just walked away from the woman I thought I would spend my life with, and strangely, despite the pain, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. I spent the next few days in a daze, alternating between questioning my decision and feeling a growing sense of relief. Jessica called and texted constantly, her messages ranging from angry accusations to tearful pleas. I did not respond to any of them. I needed space to process what had happened and what it meant for my life moving forward. I blocked her number as well as those of William and the Bennett family lawyers. To clear my head, I threw myself into work. For months, I had been developing an idea for a software application that would streamline inventory management for retail businesses using advanced predictive algorithms to optimize stock levels. It was something I had been working on in my spare time, but now I dedicated all my energy to it. 2 weeks after the Prenup meeting, I received an unexpected email from Michael Donovan, a venture capitalist I had met at an industry conference the previous year. He had heard through mutual connections that I was developing a new inventory management system and expressed interest in seeing a demo. I was surprised that word had gotten out, but welcomed the opportunity. Our meeting went better than I could have hoped. Michael was impressed with my prototype and offered to fund further development in exchange for a stake in the company. It was a fair deal that would allow me to quit my job and focus full-time on bringing my vision to reality. We shook hands, agreeing to have the lawyers draw up the paperwork. That same evening, as I was celebrating this new beginning with a quiet dinner at home, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jessica standing there, her eyes red from crying, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. I hesitated, but then stepped aside to let her in. Whatever had happened between us, I could not leave her standing on my doorstep in such a state. "Marshall, please, you have to listen to me," she began as soon as the door closed. "I have been trying to reach you for days. You have no idea what has been happening." As she talked, the truth came pouring out. The Bennett family business was in serious financial trouble. Years of mismanagement by Arthur, combined with failure to adapt to changing market trends, had left them on the brink of bankruptcy. The prenuptial agreement had never been about protecting their wealth from me. It had been about protecting whatever assets they could salvage from creditors by putting them in Jessica's name. The family had been using her as a shield, planning to transfer properties and other assets to her to keep them out of reach when the company inevitably filed for Chapter 11. They needed her married with a strong prenup to create an additional layer of protection. It had all been a calculated business move, with our relationship as a pawn in their game. I sat in stunned silence as Jessica continued to explain. She claimed she had been torn between loyalty to her family and her feelings for me. That she had convinced herself the prenup was just a formality that would never actually matter in our relationship. That she truly loved me and was sorry for allowing her family to come between us. Her revelation explained so much about their behavior, the urgency of the prenup, the increasingly restrictive terms, but it did not excuse it. If anything, it made things worse. Not only had Jessica failed to trust me with the truth, but she and her family had been willing to potentially expose me to legal issues related to their financial problems. A week ago, Jessica continued her voice. Breaking my father revealed the full extent of the company's troubles to me and William. It is even worse than I thought. We will lose almost everything. The beautiful life you thought I had that I pretended to have, it's crumbling. I need you, Marshall. Not your money, just you. Your strength. Your clear thinking. We can start over together. Jessica, I am sorry about your family's financial problems, I said carefully. But that does not change what happened between us. You were willing to start our marriage with a fundamental imbalance of power, with secrets, with a lack of trust. Those are not problems that disappear just because circumstances have changed. But I love you, she insisted, reaching for my hand. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. I gently withdrew my hand from hers. This was not just a mistake. This was a revelation of character, of values, of how you see me, and what you think a marriage should be. I am sorry, but my decision stands. Jessica left that night with fresh tears, but I remained firm. The next day, William showed up at my workplace attempting to convince me to reconsider. He admitted their deception, but framed it as a family doing what was necessary to survive. He even hinted that with my new business venture taking off, I could help them rebuild. I declined as politely as I could, suggesting they consult a reputable bankruptcy attorney instead. The irony was not lost on me. The family that had treated me as financially inferior was now hoping I might be their financial savior. The power dynamic had completely reversed, but I had no interest in wielding power over them the way they had attempted to do with me. That was not the kind of person I wanted to be. In the year that followed, my life took a direction I could never have predicted. The inventory management system, which I named StockSense, exceeded all expectations. With Michael's backing and my technical expertise, we built a product that filled a significant gap in the market. Several major retailers adopted the system, and we received offers for partnership from larger tech companies. I moved into a new home, one that better reflected my current success, but still maintained the values of simplicity and functionality that I cherished. My parents visited, often proud of what I had accomplished, but more importantly, relieved that I had found my way back to happiness. As for Jessica and the Bennetts, I heard through industry news that they had indeed filed for bankruptcy, but had managed to restructure rather than liquidate completely. They were operating on a much smaller scale now, with Arthur stepping down and William taking over as CEO. Jessica had left the family business and started her own marketing consultancy. 6 months after our breakup, Jessica sent me an email. It was different from her previous attempts to reconcile, more reflective and mature. She thanked me for standing my ground that day in the lawyer's office, writing that it had ultimately forced her to reevaluate her priorities and her relationship with her family. She was building a life based on her own efforts now, and while it was harder than she expected, it was also more satisfying. She wished me well and asked for nothing in return. I responded with a brief but sincere message, wishing her success in her new ventures. There was no animosity anymore, just recognition that we had been on fundamentally different paths. In an unexpected turn of events, I met Amanda at a friend's backyard barbecue. She was an elementary school teacher with a warm laugh and an unpretentious manner that immediately put me at ease. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on honest communication and shared values. When the topic of finances came up, as it inevitably does, the conversation was straightforward and equal. We both brought what we had to the relationship and made decisions together about our future. Looking back on my experience with Jessica, I realize now that walking out of that prenup meeting was one of the best decisions I ever made. Not because prenuptial agreements are inherently wrong, they can be necessary and fair, but because it made me confront what I truly valued in a relationship: equality, honesty, and mutual respect. Money can create beautiful opportunities, but it can also distort relationships if we let it become more important than the human connection. True partnership cannot exist where one person holds all the power, whether that power comes from wealth, status, or emotional leverage. The greatest wealth I have found is in a relationship where both people feel valued for who they are, not what they own or earn. A relationship where trust is the foundation, not legal documents. Where both people are building something together, not protecting what they already have from each other. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that turned out to be exactly what you needed? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more real-life experiences that remind us what truly matters in this journey we call life. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes walking away from what you thought you wanted leads you straight to what you truly need.